The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Windsor Castle, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Charles stood quietly in his private study, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he gazed out at the sprawling gardens. The weight of the crown felt heavier these days, not just the physical presence of it during ceremonies, but the emotional burden that came with every decision, every public appearance, every family moment that played out under the relentless scrutiny of the world. Kate had been struggling lately. He could see it in her eyes during their brief encounters at official functions, the way she carried herself with a forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The transition from being the beloved Princess of Wales to navigating the complex dynamics of a family still healing from years of public turmoil had taken its toll on her. She was graceful, always graceful, but Charles had learned to read the subtle signs that others missed. The previous evening's state dinner had been particularly challenging. Kate had performed her duties flawlessly, as she always did, greeting dignitaries with warmth and charm, making conversation that put everyone at ease. But Charles had noticed the slight tremor in her hands when she thought no one was looking, the way she excused herself more frequently than usual, the brief moments when her composure slipped just enough to reveal the exhaustion beneath. He remembered watching her during the dinner, seated between the French ambassador and his wife, her laugh genuine but tired. She had worn the sapphire necklace that had once belonged to Diana, a gesture that had not gone unnoticed by the press or by him. The weight of that symbolism, of carrying forward Diana's legacy while forging her own path, was something Charles understood perhaps better than anyone else in the family. After the guests had departed, Charles had retreated to his study, but sleep had eluded him. Instead, he found himself thinking about his daughter-in-law, about the woman who had brought such stability and joy to William's life, who had given him beautiful grandchildren, who had embraced her royal duties with a dedication that sometimes worried him. Kate gave so much of herself to the role, to the family, to the people, that Charles wondered if she ever took time to simply be herself. He had made a decision that night, one that had been forming in his mind for weeks. It was a small gesture, perhaps, but sometimes the smallest gestures carried the most meaning. Charles wanted Kate to know that she was valued, not just as the Princess of Wales, not just as William's wife, not just as the mother of future monarchs, but as the person she was, the young woman who had captured his son's heart and who had brought such genuine warmth to their sometimes cold and formal world. The plan was simple. Charles would invite Kate for tea, just the two of them, in the private sitting room that overlooked the rose garden. It would be informal, personal, a chance for them to talk without the pressure of protocol or the presence of others. He wanted to tell her how much her dedication meant to him, how proud he was of the way she had embraced her role, how grateful he was for the happiness she had brought to William and the children. But, more than that, he wanted to listen. Charles had learned, sometimes painfully, that listening was often more important than speaking, especially when it came to family. He suspected that Kate needed someone to truly hear her, to understand the pressures she faced, the expectations that weighed on her shoulders every day. He wanted to be that person for her, to offer not just his support as her father-in-law and king, but his genuine care and concern. Charles made the arrangements himself, personally calling Kate's private secretary to schedule the meeting. He specified that it should be kept completely private, no press, no official record, just a family conversation. He even went so far as to arrange for her favorite afternoon tea service, complete with the delicate finger sandwiches and pastries he knew she enjoyed. The morning of their planned meeting arrived gray and drizzly, typical London weather that seemed to match the subdued mood that had settled over the royal family in recent weeks. Charles dressed simply, choosing a comfortable sweater rather than his usual formal attire. This was to be a personal meeting, not an official audience, and he wanted every detail to reflect that intention. As he waited in the sitting room, Charles found himself feeling unexpectedly nervous. It wasn't often that he struggled with conversations. Decades of public life had taught him how to navigate even the most difficult social situations. But this felt different. This was his family, his son's wife, someone he genuinely cared about who seemed to be struggling under burdens that he understood all too well. He arranged the tea service himself, something that would have surprised the household staff had they witnessed it. The fine china gleamed in the afternoon light, the silver teapot polished to perfection. Fresh flowers from the garden, Kate's favorites, adorned the small table. Everything was prepared with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of genuine care and consideration. When the knock came at the door, Charles straightened his shoulders and called for Kate to enter. She appeared in the doorway, beautiful as always, but with a weariness around her eyes that confirmed his instincts about her current state of mind. She was dressed elegantly, but simply, in a way that suggested she, too, understood this was meant to be a personal conversation rather than a formal meeting. "Your Majesty," she said, offering a small curtsy that Charles immediately waved away with a gentle smile. "Please, Kate," he said warmly. "Today you may call me Charles. This is family time, not court time." The small gesture seemed to relax her slightly, and she returned his smile with one that was more genuine than any he had seen from her in recent weeks. Charles gestured to the comfortable chairs arranged around the tea table, and they settled in as he began to pour the tea with the practiced ease of someone who had grown up understanding that sometimes the most important conversations happened over the simplest of rituals. For the first few minutes, they talked about safe topics, the children's recent accomplishments, William's upcoming engagements, the weather. But Charles could see Kate gradually relaxing, her shoulders losing some of their tension as she realized this truly was meant to be a personal conversation rather than another official duty to navigate. "I've been wanting to speak with you," Charles began carefully, setting down his teacup and looking directly at Kate with the kind of fatherly concern that transcended royal protocol. "I've noticed that you seem to be carrying quite a heavy burden lately, and I wanted you to know that if you need someone to talk to, someone who understands the unique pressures of this life we lead, I am here." Kate's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, Charles thought he saw the glimmer of tears that she quickly blinked away. It was clear that his words had touched something deep within her, some need that perhaps she hadn't even fully acknowledged to herself. "I appreciate that more than you know," she said softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability that she rarely allowed others to see. "Sometimes it feels like I'm walking a tightrope, trying to balance everything. Being the wife William needs, the mother the children deserve, the royal the public expects. And I'm terrified of making a misstep that could hurt the family or disappoint everyone who believes in me." Charles nodded understanding, remembering his own struggles with similar feelings throughout his life. The burden of public expectation, the constant scrutiny, the weight of knowing that every decision could have far-reaching consequences. These were challenges that only someone who had lived this life could truly comprehend. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I was younger, I often felt as though I was performing a role rather than living a life. It took me many years to understand that authenticity and duty need not be mutually exclusive. The person you are, Kate, your genuine warmth, your natural empathy, your dedication to your family, and your causes, these qualities are what make you so effective in your royal role. You don't need to choose between being yourself and fulfilling your duties. In fact, it's precisely because you are so genuinely yourself that you connect with people the way you do." Kate listened intently, and Charles could see that his words were resonating with her in a way that went beyond polite conversation. This was exactly the kind of connection he had hoped to establish, a real conversation between family members who understood each other's struggles and could offer genuine support. "I sometimes feel like I'm failing everyone," Kate admitted, her composure slipping enough to reveal the depth of her concerns. "The press analyzes every outfit, every expression, every public appearance. The public has such high expectations, and I worry constantly that I'm not living up to the legacy of those who came before me. And then there's the family. I want so desperately to support William, to be the partner he needs as he prepares for his future role. But I also want to be present for George, Charlotte, and Louis. Some days it feels impossible to do everything well." Charles reached across the small space between their chairs and gently placed his hand over hers, a gesture of comfort and support that transcended formal royal protocol. "My dear Kate," he said with genuine warmth, "you are not failing anyone. Quite the opposite, in fact. You have brought such joy and stability to this family, such genuine care to your public work, such love to your marriage and your children. The fact that you care so deeply about doing well, that you feel the weight of responsibility so keenly, these are not signs of failure. They are signs of someone who takes their commitment seriously and who genuinely wants to make a positive difference." The conversation continued for the better part of an hour, with Charles sharing stories from his own early years in public life, the mistakes he had made and learned from, the moments of doubt, and the gradual development of confidence that came with experience and maturity. Kate, in turn, opened up about her specific concerns and challenges, the aspects of royal life that she found most difficult, and her hopes for how she might grow into her role, while remaining true to herself. As their time together drew to a close, Charles felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the conversation they had shared. He could see a lightness in Kate's demeanor that hadn't been there when she arrived, a renewed sense of confidence and purpose that came from knowing she was understood and supported by her family. "I want you to know," Charles said as they prepared to part ways, "that this conversation means a great deal to me. Not just because I care about your well-being, but because I have such tremendous respect for the woman you are and the royal you are becoming. You bring something special to this family, Kate, a genuine warmth and humanity that connects with people in a way that formal training never could. Never doubt your value or your importance to all of us." Kate's eyes filled with tears that she no longer tried to hide, and her smile was the first truly radiant one Charles had seen from her in months. "Thank you," she said simply. "Thank you for seeing me, for understanding, for taking the time to have this conversation. It means more than I can express." As Kate left the sitting room, Charles felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The gesture had been small in the grand scheme of royal duties and obligations, but it had addressed something fundamentally important: the human need for understanding and support within the complex world they all inhabited. He had reached out to a family member who was struggling, offered his support and wisdom, and created a connection that would strengthen not just their personal relationship, but the family as a whole. But, as Charles reflected on their conversation, he couldn't shake the feeling that this gesture, meaningful as it had been, was only the beginning of what Kate needed. The challenges she faced were not ones that could be resolved with a single conversation, however supportive and understanding it might have been. She would need ongoing support, continued understanding, and, perhaps most importantly, the space to find her own way of balancing her authentic self with her royal responsibilities. Charles made a mental note to ensure that Kate knew his door was always open for future conversations, that the support he had offered today was not a one-time gesture, but an ongoing commitment to her well-being and success. He also began to think about other ways the family might better support her, structural changes that could ease some of the pressures she faced, and opportunities to showcase her unique strengths and contributions. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as Charles returned to his study, but his mood was lighter than it had been in weeks. Sometimes the most important work of leadership happened not in grand public gestures or policy decisions, but in quiet moments of human connection and understanding. Today had been one of those moments, and Charles felt confident that both he and Kate had benefited from their time together. The days following Charles and Kate's private conversation brought a noticeable change in the atmosphere at Windsor Castle. Kate seemed lighter somehow, more at ease during family gatherings and official functions. Charles observed this transformation with quiet satisfaction, pleased that their talk had provided some of the support and reassurance she had clearly needed. However, he also recognized that one conversation, no matter how meaningful, could not address all the complex pressures that came with royal life. Camilla had been watching these developments with her own keen sense of observation. As someone who had experienced firsthand the challenges of joining the royal family later in life, she understood the unique pressures that Kate faced. However, Camilla's perspective on how to handle these challenges differed significantly from Charles's more gentle, supportive approach. She believed in resilience through experience, in learning to navigate royal life through trial and adaptation rather than through extensive emotional support. The tension between these two approaches came to a head during a family dinner at Clarence's house the following week. The gathering was meant to be informal, a chance for the extended family to connect away from the public eye. William and Kate were in attendance, along with several other family members, and the conversation flowed easily between topics of personal interest and upcoming royal engagements. Charles found himself particularly attentive to Kate throughout the evening, checking in with subtle glances to ensure she was comfortable, occasionally steering the conversation toward topics he knew interested her. It was a natural extension of the fatherly concern he had expressed during their private tea, a continuation of his commitment to supporting her through what he recognized as a challenging period in her royal journey. Kate, for her part, seemed genuinely more relaxed than she had been in recent weeks. She participated actively in the conversation, laughed genuinely at family stories, and appeared to be enjoying herself in a way that had been rare lately. Charles felt gratified to see this positive change, interpreting it as evidence that his supportive approach was having the desired effect. However, Camilla's observations of the evening led her to a different conclusion. She noticed Charles's frequent check-ins with Kate, his careful attention to her comfort, and emotional state, his protective body language when conversations turned to topics that might be sensitive. While she understood the caring intention behind these behaviors, Camilla worried that such solicitous treatment might actually undermine Kate's confidence and independence. After the other family members had departed and Kate and William had said their goodbyes, Camilla found herself alone with Charles in the drawing room. The atmosphere was comfortable and intimate, the kind of private moment between spouses where honest conversations could take place away from the formality that governs so much of their public lives. "That was a lovely evening," Charles said, settling into his favorite armchair with a satisfied smile. Kate seemed much more herself tonight. "I think our conversation last week may have helped her work through some of the pressures she's been feeling." Camilla looked up from where she was arranging some papers on the side table, her expression thoughtful. She had been considering how to approach this topic with Charles, knowing that his intentions were entirely good, but concerned about the potential long-term implications of his approach. "Charles, darling," she began carefully, "I've been watching your interactions with Kate, and while I certainly appreciate your desire to support her, I wonder if we might consider whether there are other ways to help her build confidence in her role." Charles looked at his wife with surprise, not having expected this turn in their post-dinner conversation. "What do you mean? I thought the support was exactly what she needed." She seemed so much more relaxed tonight. Camilla chose her words carefully, understanding that this was a delicate topic that touched on Charles's deepest instincts as both a father figure and a king who cared about his family's well-being. "I don't question your good intentions, of course, but I've been thinking about my own experience joining this family, the challenges I faced, and the ways I learned to overcome them. Sometimes, the most caring thing we can do for someone is to trust in their strength and resilience rather than always providing a safety net." The suggestion hung in the air between them, representing a fundamental difference in their approaches to supporting family members through difficult times. Charles's instinct was to protect and nurture, to provide emotional support and understanding. Camilla's perspective, shaped by her own challenging journey into royal life, emphasized the importance of developing independence and resilience through experience. "I'm not sure I understand what you're suggesting," Charles said, his tone becoming slightly more formal as he sensed criticism of an approach that had felt deeply right to him. "Kate is a remarkably strong and capable woman," Camilla continued, settling into the chair across from Charles. "She's navigated the challenges of royal life with grace and intelligence for over a decade. But I worry that if we're too protective, too ready to provide emotional support and reassurance, we might inadvertently send the message that we don't believe she's capable of handling these challenges on her own." Charles felt a stirring of defensiveness at this characterization of his actions. "I wasn't being protective," he said. "I was being supportive. There's a difference." Kate was clearly struggling, and I offered understanding and encouragement. "That's what family does for one another." "Of course it is," Camilla agreed quickly, recognizing that her husband was beginning to feel criticized. "And your support has clearly meant a great deal to her. But I think we also need to consider the message we send through our actions. When we constantly check in on someone's emotional state, when we adjust our behavior to accommodate their sensitivities, when we make special arrangements to ensure their comfort, even with the best of intentions, we might be suggesting that we see them as fragile rather than resilient." The conversation was touching on deeper philosophical differences between Charles and Camilla about how best to support people through difficult times. Charles's approach was rooted in empathy and emotional connection, a recognition that the pressures of royal life were unique and challenging, and that family support was essential for navigating them successfully. Camilla's perspective emphasized strength and independence, the belief that people grew stronger by working through challenges rather than being sheltered from them. "Kate isn't fragile," Charles said firmly. "She's one of the strongest people I know. But that doesn't mean she doesn't need support when she's going through a difficult time. Anyone in her position would benefit from understanding and encouragement." "I'm not suggesting that Kate is fragile," Camilla clarified. "I'm suggesting that our treatment of her might inadvertently make her feel as though we see her that way. Think about it from her perspective. She's worked so hard to prove herself in this role, to show that she's capable and reliable. If we're constantly worried about her emotional state, constantly offering special support and accommodations, might she start to wonder whether we truly believe in her strength and competence?" This perspective gave Charles pause. He hadn't considered the possibility that his supportive gestures might be interpreted as doubt about Kate's capabilities. His intention had been precisely the opposite, to reinforce his confidence in her while acknowledging the very real challenges she faced. But, surely, he said slowly, there's a difference between supporting someone through a difficult time and treating them as incapable. When I had tea with Kate, I wasn't suggesting that she couldn't handle her responsibilities. I was acknowledging that those responsibilities are challenging and offering my understanding and support. And that was a beautiful gesture, Camilla said sincerely. I'm not criticizing your tea with Kate or the conversation you shared. I'm thinking about the pattern of behavior that followed, the way you've been watching her throughout tonight, the subtle ways you've been adjusting conversations and situations to ensure her comfort. These individual actions are caring and well-intentioned, but together they might create the impression that we see Kate as someone who needs to be managed rather than someone who can manage herself. Charles found himself struggling with this characterization of his recent behavior. From his perspective, he had simply been attentive to a family member who was going through a challenging time. He had offered support when it seemed needed and continued to be mindful of her well-being in their subsequent interactions. The idea that these actions might be counterproductive was difficult for him to accept. "So what are you suggesting?" he asked, his tone carrying a note of frustration. "That I ignore Kate's struggles? That I pretend not to notice when she's having difficulty? That hardly seems like the caring response. I'm suggesting that we trust Kate to communicate her needs to us rather than constantly anticipating them," Camilla replied gently. "I'm suggesting that we show our confidence in her strength by treating her as the capable, resilient person she is. When she needs support, she can ask for it. When she's struggling, she can tell us. But, in the meantime, we should interact with her as we would with any other competent adult member of our family." The logic of Camilla's position was beginning to penetrate Charles's initial resistance, though he still felt uncomfortable with what seemed like a less caring approach. But what if she doesn't ask for help when she needs it? What if she's struggling but feels like she can't admit it because of the expectations and pressures of her role? Then, we create an environment where she feels safe to be honest about her struggles without feeling like we're constantly worried about her, Camilla said. We make it clear that we're available if she needs us, but we also make it clear that we believe in her ability to handle her responsibilities and challenges. We show our support through our confidence in her rather than through our concern about her. This was a subtle but important distinction that Charles was beginning to understand, even if he didn't entirely agree with it. The difference between supporting someone by expressing confidence in their abilities versus supporting them by being constantly attentive to their struggles was more significant than he had initially realized. "I need to think about this," Charles said finally, his tone less defensive than it had been earlier in the conversation. "Your perspective is interesting, though I'm not sure I entirely agree with it. I still believe that people benefit from knowing they're understood and supported, especially when they're facing unique challenges." "Of course they do," Camilla agreed. "I'm not suggesting that we become cold or distant. I'm suggesting that we show our support through our actions and attitudes rather than through constant emotional caretaking. We can be warm and loving and available without being protective and solicitous." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with both Charles and Camilla exploring the nuances of their different approaches to supporting Kate. Neither fully convinced the other of their perspective, but both gained a better understanding of the reasoning behind their spouse's point of view. As they prepared to retire for the evening, Charles found himself genuinely uncertain about how to proceed. His instincts told him that Kate had benefited from their conversation and from his continued attentiveness to her well-being. But Camilla's points about the importance of treating Kate as a strong, capable adult resonated with him as well. "Perhaps," he said as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, "the answer isn't to choose between these approaches but to find a balance. To be available and supportive when Kate indicates she needs it, but to otherwise treat her with the respect and confidence that her capabilities deserve." "That sounds like wisdom," Camilla replied, pleased that their conversation had led to this more nuanced understanding rather than a simple adoption of one approach over the other. However, despite this apparent resolution, both Charles and Camilla knew that putting such a balanced approach into practice would be more challenging than simply discussing it. Charles's protective instincts toward Kate had been strengthened by their recent conversation and by his observation of her struggles. Camilla's concerns about the potential negative effects of too much solicitous attention remained strong. The next test of their different approaches would come sooner than either of them expected, in a situation that would challenge both their theories about the best way to support Kate through the ongoing pressures of royal life. The opportunity for Charles to demonstrate his evolving approach to supporting Kate came unexpectedly 3 weeks later, during what should have been a routine royal engagement. The annual charity gala for the Prince's Trust was one of Charles's signature events, an evening that brought together business leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists to support causes close to his heart. Kate had been scheduled to attend alongside William, representing the younger generation of royals and helping to bridge the connection between Charles's long-standing charitable work and the future of the monarchy. The event was being held at the Royal Opera House, transformed for the evening into an elegant venue for dinner, speeches, and performances. As guests arrived, photographers captured the glamorous scene, with particular attention paid to Kate's appearance in a stunning midnight blue gown that had belonged to Diana. The choice of dress was intentional, a tribute that had been carefully planned to honor Diana's memory while showcasing Kate's growing confidence in carrying forward royal traditions. Charles arrived early to greet key donors and sponsors, a responsibility he took seriously as the driving force behind the Trust's work. He moved through the reception with practiced ease, making meaningful connections with supporters while keeping an eye on the overall flow of the event. When Kate and William arrived, he felt the familiar surge of pride at seeing them represent the family with such grace and dignity. However, as the evening progressed, Charles began to notice subtle signs that Kate was experiencing some difficulty. It started with small things, a brief hesitation before joining a conversation group, a slightly strained smile during photographs, a tendency to position herself closer to William than usual. To most observers, these would have been invisible, but Charles's recent conversations with Camilla had made him more aware of his own tendency to monitor Kate's emotional state. The first real moment of concern came during the dinner service. Kate had been seated between a prominent businessman and the wife of a major donor, both of whom were engaging conversationalists who should have made for pleasant dinner companions. However, Charles noticed that Kate seemed to be struggling to maintain the conversation, frequently looking down at her plate and offering shorter responses than was typical for her usually warm and engaging style. Charles's immediate instinct was to intervene somehow, to create a distraction or redirect the conversation in a way that might ease whatever pressure Kate was feeling. The protective impulses that had driven him to arrange their private tea several weeks earlier surged again, accompanied by the practical concern that any visible struggle on Kate's part could attract unwanted attention and speculation from the attending press. But, as he considered how to help, Camilla's words from their recent conversation echoed in his mind. Her perspective about trusting Kate's strength and resilience, about showing support through confidence rather than through intervention, gave him pause. Perhaps Kate was simply tired, or perhaps she was working through some minor social anxiety that would resolve itself naturally if given the space to do so. Charles forced himself to remain seated, to continue his own conversations while keeping Kate in his peripheral vision rather than focusing directly on her apparent difficulty. It was a more challenging approach than his instincts suggested, requiring him to resist the urge to smooth over what might be a temporary and manageable situation. As the dinner courses continued, Charles watched Kate gradually recover her composure. She began engaging more actively with her dinner companions. Her smile became more natural, and her body language relaxed. It appeared that whatever had been troubling her had indeed been temporary, and that she had worked through it without requiring any external intervention. Charles felt a mixture of relief and validation. Relief that Kate was clearly fine, and a growing appreciation for Camilla's perspective about trusting in Kate's own resilience. The evening's program included several speeches, with Charles delivering the keynote address about the Trust's work and future goals. Kate and William were seated at the head table, visible to all the guests and to the cameras that were documenting the event. During Charles's speech, he found himself looking toward Kate several times, not out of concern for her well-being, but out of genuine appreciation for her presence and support. However, the real test of Charles's evolving approach came during the reception that followed dinner. As guests mingled and enjoyed the evening's entertainment, Charles noticed Kate engaged in conversation with a group of young entrepreneurs who had benefited from trust programs. The conversation appeared animated and positive, with Kate clearly enjoying hearing their stories and discussing their business ventures. Then, Charles overheard a fragment of conversation from a nearby group of donors that made his protective instincts flare. Two women were discussing Kate's choice of dress for the evening, and their comments had taken a critical turn that touched on sensitive topics about Diana's legacy and Kate's role in carrying it forward. The conversation wasn't malicious, but It was the kind of thoughtless commentary that Charles knew could be deeply hurtful if Kate overheard it. His first impulse was to approach the group and diplomatically redirect their conversation, or to create a distraction that would move Kate away from the potential to hear comments that might upset her. The protective father-in-law in him wanted to shield her from any negativity or criticism, especially on an evening when she had already seemed to be struggling somewhat. But, again, Camilla's perspective gave him pause. Kate was an adult woman who had been handling public scrutiny and criticism for over a decade. She had developed her own strategies for dealing with unkind comments and had proven repeatedly that she could maintain her composure and dignity even in challenging situations. By intervening to protect her from this relatively minor potential upset, Charles would be sending the message that he didn't believe she could handle it herself. More importantly, Charles realized that Kate was completely absorbed in her conversation with the young entrepreneurs and showed no signs of having heard or being affected by the nearby commentary. She was engaged, animated, and clearly enjoying herself. Any intervention on his part would be solving a problem that didn't actually exist, while potentially creating awkwardness and drawing attention to criticism that Kate had successfully avoided. Charles made the conscious decision to remain where he was, to trust in Kate's ability to navigate the social complexities of the event without his protection or intervention. Instead, he turned his attention to his own conversations and responsibilities as host, checking in with guests, thanking donors for their support, and ensuring that the evening was successful from a charitable and relationship-building perspective. As the evening progressed, Charles's confidence in this approach grew. Kate continued to thrive in her interactions with guests, moving gracefully between conversation groups, and clearly enjoying herself. Her earlier moments of difficulty had resolved completely, and she was now fully engaged in the kind of meaningful conversations that made these events valuable for everyone involved. The real validation of Charles's restraint came when Kate approached him near the end of the evening, her face glowing with genuine enthusiasm and satisfaction. "Charles, what an incredible evening," she said warmly. "I've had the most fascinating conversations with some of the trust beneficiaries. Their stories are so inspiring, and it's wonderful to see how the programs have really made a difference in their lives. Thank you for including William and me in such an important event." Charles felt a deep sense of satisfaction at Kate's words and demeanor. She was clearly energized by the evening's interactions, proud of her participation, and grateful for the opportunity to contribute to something meaningful. There was no trace of the struggles he had noticed earlier, no indication that she felt unsupported or overwhelmed. Instead, she seemed confident and fulfilled, exactly the outcome that Camilla had predicted would result from trusting Kate's own strength and resilience. "The pleasure is entirely ours," Charles replied genuinely. "Your presence this evening has meant a great deal to our guests and to the young people you've spoken with. You have a natural gift for connecting with people and making them feel valued and heard." As Kate rejoined William for their departure, Charles reflected on the evening's lessons. His choice to refrain from intervening during Kate's moments of difficulty had required considerable self-restraint, going against his natural protective instincts. But the results seemed to validate Camilla's perspective about the importance of trusting Kate's capabilities and allowing her to navigate challenges independently. However, Charles also recognized that the evening's situation had been relatively minor in the grand scheme of royal challenges. Kate's momentary struggles had been brief and had resolved naturally without creating any significant problems. Whether this hands-off approach would be appropriate or effective in more serious situations remained an open question. When Charles returned home that evening, Camilla was waiting up to hear about the gala. As he recounted the evening's events, including his observations of Kate's temporary difficulties and his decision not to intervene, Camilla listened with evident approval. "It sounds like you found a good balance," she said thoughtfully. "You were aware and ready to help if needed, but you trusted Kate to handle the situation herself. And from what you've described, that trust was well placed." "It wasn't easy," Charles admitted. "Every instinct told me to step in and smooth things over. But I kept thinking about our conversation, about the importance of showing confidence in Kate's strength rather than constantly worrying about her well-being." "And how do you feel about the results?" Camilla asked. Charles considered the question carefully. "I feel like Kate handled everything beautifully, probably better than she would have if I had interfered. She worked through her initial difficulties and ended up having a genuinely positive experience. I think you may be right about the value of stepping back and letting people find their own strength. But Even as Charles expressed this growing appreciation for Camilla's approach, he couldn't shake a lingering unease about completely abandoning his protective instincts toward Kate. The evening had worked out well, but he wondered whether there might be situations where intervention and support would be not just appropriate, but necessary. This internal conflict would soon be put to a much more serious test, one that would challenge both Charles's newfound restraint and Camilla's philosophy about the benefits of allowing people to handle their own challenges. The delicate balance they were trying to strike between support and independence was about to face its most significant examination yet. The true test of Charles's evolving approach to supporting Kate came during a state visit from the President of France and his wife, one of the most significant diplomatic events of the year. Such visits required flawless coordination between royal protocol, government objectives, and media management, with every detail scrutinized by both domestic and international observers. Kate's role in the three-day program was substantial, including a formal state dinner, cultural events, and several high-profile public appearances. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came on the morning of the second day, when Kate's private secretary called Charles's office with an unusual request. Kate was experiencing what her doctor had diagnosed as a severe migraine, complicated by what appeared to be stress-related symptoms that were affecting her ability to function normally. The secretary's carefully diplomatic language couldn't entirely mask the gravity of the situation. Kate was genuinely unwell, but the timing couldn't have been worse. Charles received this information while reviewing his own schedule for the day, which included a private meeting with the French president to discuss trade relationships and a luncheon for business leaders from both countries. His immediate reaction was one of concern for Kate's well-being, followed quickly by worry about the implications of her potential absence from scheduled events. The state visit had been planned for months, with Kate's participation prominently featured in press materials and diplomatic protocols. Her presence at that afternoon's cultural exhibition was particularly important, as it showcased British arts organizations that she personally supported. The evening's informal reception was designed to highlight the close personal relationships between the two royal families, with Kate and William representing the future of Anglo-French diplomatic connections. Charles's protective instincts immediately engaged. His first thought was to quietly rearrange the day's schedule to minimize Kate's responsibilities while ensuring that her absence wouldn't create diplomatic embarrassment or media speculation. He could personally take on some of her scheduled interactions. Camilla could step in for others, and they could find tactful ways to explain any notable absences. But, as Charles began to consider these accommodations, Camilla's recent words about trusting Kate's strength and resilience echoed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. Was his immediate move toward protective intervention exactly the kind of behavior that might undermine Kate's confidence in her own ability to handle challenging situations? Was he once again treating her as someone who needed to be managed rather than as a capable adult who could make her own decisions about her limitations and capabilities? The internal conflict Charles felt was intense and immediate. On one hand, Kate was genuinely unwell, and the demands of state visit protocol were genuinely grueling even for someone in perfect health. On the other hand, Kate hadn't actually asked for accommodation or intervention. Her secretary had simply informed Charles's office of her condition, a courtesy notification rather than a request for help. Charles found himself in an unprecedented position of uncertainty. His decades of experience in royal protocol told him to immediately begin damage control to protect both Kate and the broader royal family from any potential embarrassment or criticism that might result from her being visibly unwell during such an important event. But his recent conversations with Camilla about the importance of treating Kate as a strong, independent adult gave him pause about implementing solutions that she hadn't requested. After considerable internal debate, Charles made a decision that went against his every protective instinct. He would not proactively rearrange the schedule or create accommodations for Kate's condition. Instead, he would ensure that she knew support was available if she needed it, but he would leave the decision about how to proceed entirely in her hands. If Kate decided she needed to withdraw from some or all of her remaining commitments, he would support that decision completely. If she decided to proceed with her scheduled activities despite her condition, he would trust her judgment and resist any urge to monitor her performance or step in to help. This decision required Charles to actively override his paternal instincts and his practical concerns about potential diplomatic or media complications. It was one of the most difficult choices he had made regarding family matters in years, precisely because it required him to prioritize Kate's autonomy over his own desire to protect her from potential difficulty or embarrassment. Charles conveyed his decision to Kate through her private secretary, with a carefully worded message that expressed his complete confidence in her judgment about how to handle the situation. He emphasized that accommodations could be made if she needed them, but that the choice was entirely hers to make. He also made it clear that her well-being was more important than any protocol or diplomatic considerations, while simultaneously communicating his trust in her ability to make the right decision for herself. The response that came back from Kate's office several hours later both surprised and impressed Charles. Kate had decided to proceed with most of her scheduled commitments, with minor modifications to allow for rest periods between events. She would attend the cultural exhibition, but skipped the private reception that preceded it. She would participate in the evening's informal gathering, but would likely leave earlier than originally planned. Most importantly, she had developed this plan herself, in consultation with her doctor and her own assessment of what she could realistically manage. As Charles read Kate's proposed modifications to her schedule, he felt a complex mixture of admiration and anxiety. Admiration for Kate's thoughtful approach to balancing her responsibilities with her health needs, and for her clear communication about her limitations and capabilities. Anxiety about whether she was pushing herself too hard out of a sense of duty, and about whether he should be doing more to ensure her comfort and success. The real test came that afternoon at the cultural exhibition, where Charles would have his first opportunity to observe how Kate was managing her condition in a high-pressure public setting. The event was held at the National Gallery, with carefully curated displays of British artistic treasures and contemporary works. Kate's role was to guide the French dignitaries through the exhibition, providing personal insights about the artists and works that she had studied and supported through her charitable activities. When Charles arrived at the gallery, he immediately sought out Kate with his eyes, looking for signs of distress or difficulty that might indicate she needed support. What he saw instead was a composed, engaged woman who was clearly managing her condition with remarkable grace and professionalism. Kate was paler than usual and moved more slowly than normal, but she was fully present in her conversations with the French visitors and clearly knowledgeable and passionate about the artwork they were viewing. Charles watched as Kate guided the president's wife through a display of contemporary British paintings, explaining the cultural significance of different works and sharing personal anecdotes about her interactions with some of the artists. Her energy was more subdued than usual, but her engagement was genuine and her expertise evident. The French delegation was clearly impressed with both her knowledge and her warmth, exactly the kind of diplomatic success that made these cultural exchanges valuable. Throughout the exhibition, Charles forced himself to maintain his distance, to resist the urge to check on Kate's well-being or to position himself nearby in case she needed assistance. This restraint required constant conscious effort, as his natural inclination was to hover protectively and be ready to step in if she showed any signs of struggle. The most challenging moment came when Charles noticed Kate pause for a slightly longer moment than usual while transitioning between exhibition rooms. She placed her hand briefly against a wall, in what appeared to be a moment of steadying herself, before continuing on with her group. Every protective instinct Charles possessed urged him to approach her and quietly offer assistance or suggest a break. Instead, Charles forced himself to remain where he was, to trust that Kate was managing her condition appropriately and would ask for help if she needed it. The decision felt almost physically painful, requiring him to actively override his deepest paternal impulses in favor of respecting Kate's autonomy and judgment. His restraint proved to be the right choice. Kate's pause was brief and unnoticed by her companions, and she continued through the remainder of the exhibition with evident enjoyment and engagement. She clearly knew her own limitations and was managing them effectively without requiring external intervention or support. The evening reception presented a different kind of challenge. The event was more social and less structured than the afternoon's exhibition, with guests mingling freely and conversations flowing organically. This format was typically one that Kate excelled at, but it also required sustained energy and social engagement that might be more difficult given her condition. Charles arrived at the reception with a carefully planned approach to his own behavior. He would be present and available if Kate needed him, but he would not monitor her interactions or position himself nearby unless she specifically sought him out. He would engage in his own conversations and fulfill his own hosting responsibilities, trusting that Kate was managing her participation appropriately. As the evening progressed, Charles's confidence in this approach grew. Kate moved through the reception with evident care for her own energy levels, engaging meaningfully with key guests while clearly pacing herself. She chose her conversation strategically, spending quality time with the most important diplomatic contacts while politely limiting her participation in more casual interactions. What impressed Charles most was Kate's evident comfort with her own modifications to her usual approach. She wasn't trying to pretend that everything was normal or to push through her condition without regard for her limitations. Instead, she was openly and appropriately managing her participation in a way that honored both her responsibilities and her health needs. The evening's greatest validation of Charles's restraint came when the French president's wife sought him out specifically to compliment Kate's contributions to the cultural exchange. "Your daughter-in-law is remarkable," she said warmly. "Her knowledge of British art and culture is impressive, but more than that, her genuine passion for these subjects comes through so clearly. She has given us such meaningful insights into British cultural life. You must be very proud." Charles felt a surge of pride and satisfaction that went far beyond the diplomatic success of the evening. Kate had not only managed her challenging condition with grace and professionalism, but she had actually excelled in her role despite the difficulties she was facing. His decision to trust her judgment rather than rushing to provide protection and accommodation had allowed her to demonstrate her own remarkable strength and capability. When the reception concluded, Kate approached Charles with a tired but genuine smile. "Thank you for trusting me to manage today," she said quietly. "I know it probably wasn't easy to step back, but it meant everything to me to know that you believed I could handle it." Charles felt a profound moment of recognition that his growth in understanding how to support Kate was far from complete, but that important progress had been made. The evening had demonstrated that sometimes the most caring thing he could do was to trust in Kate's strength rather than rushing to provide protection she hadn't requested and might not need. 3 months after the French state visit, Charles found himself reflecting on how profoundly his relationship with Kate had evolved. The lessons learned from Camilla's perspective about trust and independence had transformed not just his interactions with Kate, but his understanding of what true support actually meant within the complex dynamics of royal family life. However, the real test of this evolution was yet to come, in a situation that would challenge every assumption he had developed about the balance between protection and empowerment. The crisis began on a quiet Tuesday morning in November, when Kate's private secretary requested an urgent meeting with Charles. The formal tone of the request immediately signaled that this was not a routine scheduling matter or minor protocol question. When Sarah Mitchell, Kate's longtime aide, arrived at Charles's study, her composed exterior couldn't entirely mask the gravity of what she had come to discuss. "Your Majesty," she began carefully, "I'm afraid we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. There have been some concerning developments regarding the Princess of Wales that could potentially escalate into a significant public relations crisis." Charles gestured for Sarah to sit down, his expression growing serious as he sensed the weight of what was coming. In his experience, when trusted staff members used phrases like significant public relations crisis, the reality was often more serious than the careful diplomatic language suggested. Sarah continued with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to deliver difficult news clearly and comprehensively. Over the past several weeks, there have been increasing social media rumors and tabloid speculation about the princess's health and emotional well-being. What started as isolated comments and unfounded gossip has begun to gain momentum, with some particularly malicious suggestions about her fitness for royal duties. Charles felt his protective instincts immediately engage, but he forced himself to listen carefully before responding. The evolution in his approach to supporting Kate had taught him the importance of gathering complete information before deciding on a course of action. The rumors appear to have originated from a few unflattering photographs taken during recent public appearances, Sarah explained, pulling out a tablet to show Charles the images in question. In these photos, the princess appears tired or distracted, and online commentators have begun speculating about everything from marriage problems to mental health struggles to substance abuse. The speculation is completely unfounded, but it's spreading rapidly across social platforms and beginning to be picked up by more mainstream media outlets. Charles examined the photographs with a growing sense of outrage. The images showed Kate during perfectly normal royal engagements, caught in brief moments between smiles or during transitions between conversations. To Charles, They simply showed a hardworking woman fulfilling demanding public duties. That such innocent moments could be twisted into malicious speculation about her character and well-being struck him as profoundly unfair and potentially damaging. What has been Kate's response to this situation? Charles asked, recognizing that his new approach required him to understand Kate's own perspective and desires before determining how to proceed. The princess is aware of the speculation, of course, Sarah replied. Her initial instinct has been to ignore it completely, to continue with her scheduled engagements, and let her actions speak for themselves. She's expressed frustration with the idea of dignifying baseless rumors with any kind of response. Charles nodded, recognizing this as exactly the kind of strong, independent response that Camilla had encouraged him to trust and support. Kate was not asking for rescue or intervention. She was choosing to handle the situation according to her own judgment about the best way forward. However, Sarah's expression indicated that the situation was more complex than Kate's preferred approach might effectively address. The challenge, Your Majesty, is that the rumors are gaining enough traction that they may soon move beyond social media gossip into more serious territory. We've had inquiries from several major publications, and there are indications that some outlets may be preparing more substantial pieces based on these unfounded speculations. This information triggered every protective instinct Charles had developed over decades of dealing with media intrusion and public speculation about his family. His immediate impulse was to mobilize the full resources of royal communications staff, to issue strong statements refuting the rumors, to perhaps even consider legal action against the most egregious offenders. The idea of allowing malicious speculation about Kate to continue unchallenged felt fundamentally wrong to him. But, as Charles considered his options, he found himself caught between competing impulses. His protective instincts demanded immediate action to shield Kate from further speculation and potential harm. However, his growing understanding of the importance of trusting Kate's judgment suggested that he should respect her desire to handle the situation herself, even if her approach seemed potentially inadequate to address the scale of the emerging crisis. Has Kate specifically requested any assistance from the palace communications team? Charles asked, trying to understand whether his potential intervention would be welcome or would override Kate's autonomous handling of the situation. Not directly, Sarah admitted. She's made it clear that she prefers not to engage with the speculation at all. However, I believe she may not fully understand the potential scope of what we could be facing if this continues to escalate. This was exactly the kind of situation that challenged Charles's evolving philosophy about supporting Kate. On one hand, respecting her autonomy suggested that he should follow her lead and avoid intervention she hadn't requested. On the other hand, his experience and resources might prevent a situation from developing that could cause Kate significant personal and professional harm. Charles requested a brief pause in their meeting to consider his options. Walking to the window of his study, he found himself thinking about the journey he had taken over the past several months in learning how to balance protection with empowerment in his relationship with Kate. The lessons had been valuable, but this situation felt different in scale and potential consequences. After several minutes of internal debate, Charles made a decision that represented a synthesis of his protective instincts and his respect for Kate's autonomy. He would not take unilateral action to address the rumors, but he would ensure that Kate had complete information about the potential consequences of the current situation and access to all available resources for addressing it. Please arrange a meeting with Kate as soon as possible, Charles told Sarah. I want to discuss this situation with her directly, to make sure she has a full understanding of what we might be facing and what options are available. But I want to be clear that the decision about how to proceed will be entirely hers to make. This approach felt like the right balance to Charles, providing Kate with information and support while respecting her right to make her own decisions about how to handle challenges that affected her directly. It avoided both the extremes of unilateral intervention and complete non-involvement. The meeting with Kate was arranged for the following morning, in the same private sitting room where Charles had offered his initial support several months earlier. As Kate entered the room, Charles was struck by how much she had changed since their first conversation. Where she had once appeared overwhelmed and uncertain, she now carried herself with evident confidence and self-assurance. The evolution was remarkable and reinforced Charles's growing belief in the value of trusting her strength. Sarah has briefed you on the current situation? Charles asked after they had settled in with tea. She has, Kate replied calmly. I have to admit, I'm frustrated by the whole thing, but I'm not particularly surprised. This kind of speculation seems to be an inevitable part of public life, and I've learned that the best response is usually to let your actions speak louder than your words. Charles nodded, appreciating Kate's mature perspective while also recognizing his responsibility to ensure she understood the full scope of what they might be facing. I agree with that philosophy and principle, and I respect your judgment about how to handle this. But I wanted to make sure you're aware of some additional considerations that might influence your thinking. Over the next hour, Charles walked Kate through the intelligence they had gathered about the spreading rumors, the potential for mainstream media pickup, and the various options available for addressing the situation. He presented the information objectively, without advocating for any particular course of action, allowing Kate to draw her own conclusions about the best way forward. As they talked, Charles was impressed by Kate's thoughtful analysis of the situation. She asked perceptive questions about the sources of the rumors, the likely motivations of the outlets considering more substantial coverage, and the potential effectiveness of different response strategies. Her approach was neither dismissive nor panicked, but rather carefully analytical in a way that demonstrated her growing sophistication in handling public relations challenges. "I appreciate you bringing me this additional information," Kate said finally. "It does help me understand the potential scope of what we're dealing with. But I still think my instincts about the best response are sound. I'd rather not give these rumors additional oxygen by responding directly to them. Instead, I'd like to focus on positive, high-profile engagements over the next several weeks that will naturally demonstrate my commitment and capability." Kate's proposed approach struck Charles as both strategically sound and personally authentic. Rather than engaging defensively with malicious speculation, she was choosing to proactively demonstrate through her actions exactly the kind of person and royal she was. It was a confident, mature response that showed remarkable growth from the uncertain woman who had needed reassurance several months earlier. "That sounds like an excellent plan," Charles said with genuine admiration. "And I want you to know that whatever support you need to implement it, additional staff resources, scheduling assistance, communications coordination, will be made available immediately." As their meeting concluded, Charles felt a profound sense of satisfaction about how the conversation had unfolded. He had provided Kate with information and resources while respecting her autonomy to make her own decisions. She had demonstrated remarkable judgment and confidence in developing her response strategy. The balance they had achieved felt healthy and sustainable in a way that his earlier protective impulses had not. The subsequent weeks proved Kate's approach to be exactly right. Her high-profile engagements, including a particularly successful visit to a children's hospital and a well-received speech about mental health awareness, naturally demonstrated her competence and commitment. The malicious rumors lost momentum in the face of positive coverage of her substantive work, gradually fading from public attention without requiring any direct response or defensive measures. More importantly, Kate's handling of the crisis reinforced her confidence in her own judgment and capabilities. She had faced a significant challenge, developed an appropriate response strategy, and seen it succeed through her own efforts and decision-making. The experience strengthened rather than undermined her sense of independence and self-efficacy. As Charles observed Kate's success in managing this difficult situation, he reflected on how much his own understanding of true support had evolved. His initial instincts to protect and intervene had gradually given way to a more nuanced approach that trusted Kate's strength while ensuring she had access to information and resources. The result had been not just better outcomes for specific challenging situations, but a stronger, more confident Kate who was better equipped to handle future difficulties independently. The transformation in their relationship had been profound and mutual. Kate had grown into a more self-assured and capable royal, while Charles had learned that sometimes the most caring thing he could do was to trust in someone's strength rather than rushing to provide protection they didn't need. The balance they had achieved felt sustainable and healthy, based on mutual respect and genuine understanding of each other's capabilities and needs. In quiet moments of reflection, Charles recognized that this evolution in his relationship with Kate had taught him broader lessons about leadership and family dynamics that extended far beyond their specific situation. The principle of supporting people by trusting their strength rather than focusing on their vulnerabilities was one that could transform many relationships and many approaches to helping others navigate difficult challenges. As the year drew to a close, Charles felt grateful for the journey he and Kate had taken together, from his initial protective gestures through Camilla's challenging perspectives to their current balanced dynamic of mutual respect and appropriate support. It had been a learning experience for both of them, one that had ultimately strengthened not just their individual capabilities but their relationship and their effectiveness as working members of the royal family.